Happy Friday, fight fans, and welcome to Inside the Fence, brought to you by No Game Schedule, the official UFC segment of No Game Schedule. I'm John Mastay, joined alongside Chief UFC Analyst for No Game Schedule, Drew. Do we have a nickname for you that I can put in between Drew and Johnson?
Most people on Whatnot call me Drew J, so Drew J, I guess.
We're not doing that. We will come up with a fighter-based nickname for Drew for the next UFC card. That will be the next thing we work on. Today, we are talking about UFC 314, the main title card of Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez. I'm going to get into it really quickly, okay? Drew, there's a question I ask you every single time we talk about Diego Lopez. What's the question I ask you when we talk about Diego Lopez?
What is the deal with his hair?
Yeah, what's the deal with Diego Lopez's haircut? If you've never seen a photo of Diego Lopez's haircut, he's got half a bowl cut slash mullet slash just like shaved sides. Whatever. And then on the other side, Volkanovski's got no hair. So this is really just this might be what decides the fight on Saturday is whose barber who shows up the most. But anyway, Drew, how you doing today? How you been, man? Always happy to have you back on the show.
Absolutely. It's always a pleasure to be here, John. I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. So let's get right into it. Before we get to the main card like we normally do, you just mentioned to me that there were two smaller fights that you wanted to touch about. I'll leave that up to you. Are they in the early prelims or just the prelims?
So the second one I want to talk about is actually what they call the featured prelim. That's almost like the headliner of the prelims. So every preliminary card has like that featured prelim, which is like the best prelim on the card. Not quite good enough to get onto the main card, but you're pretty much knocking on its door. But before that, I want to talk about this women's strawweight bout of Yan Xiaonan and Verna Jandiroba. Yan X is a slight dog at plus 124. Verna is a slight favorite at minus 148. But I feel like this fight's a little bit deeper than who wins because there's now rumors of Zhang Weili moving up to 125 to fight Valentina for a women's super fight. And Dana has said that if she moves up to 125 to fight Val, she has to vacate her strawweight belt. And so I feel like the winner of this fight will get to fight Tatiana Suarez for that vacated belt if Weili moves up. So for my pick on this fight, I want to take Verna Jandiroba. Her wrestling game is probably one of the best we've seen currently in women's MMA. The way she sprawls in takedowns, the way she can seem to pull an armbar or a rear naked choke out of nowhere is exceptional. And we've seen Yan X doesn't do too well with grapplers. I mean, Yan X looked really good in her last fight against Tabitha Ricci at UFC Singapore, but I don't think Ricci's quite on the level as some of the other girls that are in this division. So for that reason, I want to take Verna. And then we're going to move on to the featured prelim, which is Dan Ige and Sean Woodson. Dan Ige is number 15, plus 142 favorite. Sean Woodson is unranked, minus 170. And this is going to be a fight to see who's going to get that number 15 spot. I think Sean Woodson's been knocking on that door for a while. One thing that we did talk about earlier this week was the weight cut that Sean Woodson has gone through, where he started his fighting career as a heavyweight boxer weighing in at 205. Now he fights at 145 in the UFC. And is absolutely ripped. So I feel like this is going to be a really good fight for people to watch out for another name that's going to be up and coming in that featherweight division. So for that reason, I'm going to take Sean Woodson in this fight. Dan Ige actually fought Diego Lopez on about 4 hours' notice at one of the pay-per-views. Remember, you were sitting there with me watching it, and you're like, what happened to Brian Ortega?
Yeah, that was the first introduction I had to Lopez at the time, which is most people's first introduction to Lopez, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
So right now, Dan Ige comes in at plus 142. This is according to the UFC official page. Right now, it is technically Thursday. This will come out tomorrow, about Friday afternoon when you're watching this. So maybe the lines change depending on what happens. Right now, Dan Ige plus 142 and Sean Woodson coming in at minus 170. You said you were taking Ige. Did I hear that correctly?
No, actually, I want to take Woodson on this one. I think Woodson. I've watched a lot of Woodson's pre-UFC fights. I was a fan of him before he came to the UFC. So I've seen all of his UFC fights, and his striking is absolutely phenomenal. I feel like he might be able to pick apart some of the best guys in this division in a couple years. But for now, I think Dan Ige is a true test to see what's Woodson really made of. Can he compete with a ranked guy that's been in the UFC for a few years? And in my opinion, I think he can.
If you look at their significant strikes versus grappling comparison, significant strikes they're pretty comparable. Significant strikes, Dan Ige is about 45%, Woodson is at 46%. Landed per minute, it's 3.66 to 5.366, so it's very close. However, if you go up with their grappling stats, Woodson has a takedown accuracy of 62%, Ige 26%, and then takedown defense is 84 to 57. So is Dan Ige, is he going to have to be forced to keep this, standing? I feel like if he goes to the mat, this might not go the way he wants it to.
Absolutely. I mean, Sean Woodson's never really been known as a good wrestler. I mean, he's your typical guy who came from boxing that didn't have to work on his strikes a lot when he came to the UFC. So a lot of his time has been spent, with working on leg kicks. And he's got a little bit of grappling, but I don't think it's on a very, very high level. I think what you'd call it is mediocre is a bad word, but I'd say middle of the run is what his grappling is. I feel like it's average. Just enough to get by if you need it, but he's more going to rely on his fists.
Yeah, it's nothing to write home about at all. Let's move on to the main card here. Some good fights here. This isn't going to be the most, sensational card that people are going to... Maybe it is, who knows, but it's just on paper right now it doesn't seem like it. I already see a name on this list. I'm pretty sure I can't wait to talk about this guy. But let's start with the light heavyweight bout. Nikita Krylov versus Dominic Reyes, the number 8 versus the number 11 rated fighters in the conference. What do you think about it, Drew?
I'm going to just come straight out and say I'm taking Reyes. I don't think that there's really anybody you could line Reyes up against, other than maybe a handful of names, that I would not bet Dominic Reyes. I think Dominic Reyes beat John Jones in their fight. I think I've watched that fight 5 or 6 times over, and I cannot in my right mind see how you score that 48-47 for John Jones. I feel clearly that Dominic Reyes won 3 of those rounds, and I think if that fight goes the other way, we're not talking about John Jones being the GOAT. I really think that version of Dominic Reyes is still there. Dominic Reyes is a very, very dominant, very forward-fighting fighter, has heavy, heavy hands, and I feel like Krylov taking a little time to off his last fight coming into this one, I feel like it's going to be a really tough test for Krylov to really get in there and stand and bang with Dominic Reyes. So for that reason, I'm taking Dominic Reyes, maybe even inside the distance with a knockout.
How long ago was that John Jones fight with him? Like how far disconnected is he from?
That fight was UFC 247. So that was, let me double check. That was February 9th, 2020. So right before COVID happened. So you're not too far removed from that.
I mean, it's 5 years, man. In the life of a fighter, that's a long time.
Absolutely. I could see that, but you look at his last few performances, that Dominic Reyes comes out as a big dog and always seems to just make an appearance. Like, nobody thought he'd beat Dustin Jacoby, who was an unranked, just absolute menace of a fighter. And Dominic Reyes comes out and just floors him in the first round. Like, he's derailed a lot of hype trains, and you look at him as sort of like a very, very seasoned veteran. I feel like Dominic Reyes is going to win this fight.
All right, Dominic Reyes it is. Let's move up just a little bit to the featherweight bout. Bryce Mitchell versus Gene Silva. Let's get this right out of the way. Isn't Bryce Mitchell the guy who lives in a trailer park and believes in like flat earth theory and just conspiracy theories?
Actually, we're going to go one step below a trailer park. He lives on a single wide trailer on his land in Arkansas. So that's it. And he built an MMA gym in his barn.
It's not even that he lives with other trailers. He's just by himself in one trailer.
Well, he's got a wife and I think a daughter, but so it's just them on this land. And then in his barn, he built an MMA gym, and got to give him credit. I mean, he wears camo shorts. He's a certified redneck.
I don't know much about Bryce Mitchell outside of the fact that he's a conspiracy theorist and he might be a little crazy. So tell us about this, Drew.
So I feel like Bryce Mitchell, after he got knocked out by Josh Emmett and had a seizure in the middle of the octagon at Volkanovski, as one of the undercard fights of the last Volkanovski fight, he hasn't really been the same. We haven't really seen that dominant of Bryce Mitchell. Sure, he knocked out Crone Gracie, but it's Crone Gracie. It's not a absolute true contender. But you look at the guy he's fighting. This guy is an absolute unhinged lunatic. Gene Silva, fighting out of Brazil with the Fighting Nerds. This guy is just something else. I mean, a lot of his pre-UFC days, he would climb on the fence and bark like a dog at his opponent. He is just unhinged. He'll get in there. He will throw everything in the kitchen sink at you. You know, he's gonna just pepper you with shots. He's gonna try to take you down. And I feel like Bryce Mitchell just isn't really gonna be prepared for a true just absolute maniac like Gene Silva.
Right now, if you look at the odds for the win by rate, Silva is currently has an 80% knockout or TKO, and a submission. Mitchell is actually in his favor, 53% to 13%, and then going to decision will be 51 to 7 in Mitchell's favor. Correct me if I'm wrong. If I read this, essentially what's going to come down to is if Silva can land his punches and if Mitchell can stay up on his feet. Do you often see fights like this where it's just so one-sided towards a specific category, where it's like, okay, this guy's really phenomenal at striking. Obviously, this guy's really phenomenal at wrestling. Do you see that often in the UFC? I feel like we've been getting that a little bit more and more, where there's no, like, Israel Adesanya, the last style bender, right? I feel like we're getting further away from a guy who can do everything, and we're getting closer towards people who are just really proficient at one thing. What's your take on that?
Absolutely. I mean, we see this. You see this a lot more than you think. Like just because Bryce Mitchell only has 6% of his wins coming by knockout doesn't mean that he doesn't have power. Like Bryce Mitchell is more known as a wrestler, but he also has good grappling. Like there's a little bit of a difference between wrestling and grappling.
Sure.
But he's more known as like an all-around, like I don't want to say like ground guy. Like you get on the ground with Bryce Mitchell, you're probably not going to get back up. He's going to either lay and pray or try to get you in a submission. Whereas Gene Silva, I feel like his submission wins aren't coming off takedowns. It's off of his knockdowns that he manages to get on top and go, okay, instead of beating this guy up, I'll just choke him out. But he's got almost 1.5 knockdowns per 15 minutes of fighting time, which is pretty impressive. It means if you fight him, you're probably going to get thrown on the ground, and I definitely wouldn't want to be on the ground when this guy tries to jump on top of me and try to, knock me out. But that's usually how Gene Silva fights.
So final thing to say here. So Mitchell plus 225 against Silva minus 278. I don't know why that's so hard for me to read. You going with Silva in this one? It seems like everything you said has kind of led you towards that decision.
Absolutely. I think Gene Silva's on that level where he's going to come out here, and if he finishes Bryce Mitchell, like I think a lot of people in the MMA community think he will, then we're gonna be set up for an absolutely stacked featherweight division. I feel like the featherweight division is almost like that lightweight division where anybody in the top 10 or 15 is just an absolute killer. They're the two most loaded divisions in the UFC for pound talent. I really think that Gene Silva's gonna finally be ranked come Monday morning.
Speaking of the lightweight division, let's move up to it. The number 7 ranked Michael Chandler is taking on the number 12 ranked Paddy Pimblett. That's Paddy the Baddy. I don't think a single person knows his last name is Pimblett. He's one of those. It's one of those guys where just no one knows him. Paddy the Baddy looks like a medieval peasant from Victorian era. He looks like he'd be wearing like a really big brown coat. Gonna have some soup, please. That's what I don't know. My interpretation. Whether or not that has anything to do with the fight, I don't know. That's just my take on it. But Michael Chandler currently coming in at plus 124, and Paddy Pimblett coming in at minus 148. This is not a title fight, but this has the feel of it almost. I feel like these have been two of the biggest guys in UFC for about the last maybe 3 or 4 years or so. Maybe I'll just say 2 or 3. I won't go that far back. But even someone like myself who's not a UFC expert, I know both of these guys, and I know this should be a good fight. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Before we go to that fight, we skipped one by accident. We got to go to Yair Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull. It's going to be the third to last fight of the night.
We did skip one.
Yeah.
One. Back to the featherweight. Cut that out.
Absolutely.
Editor, cut that out. But go ahead.
So we got a guy who came from Bellator, Patricio Pitbull. He was a former double champ of Bellator. Is an absolute amazing fighter, making his UFC debut against Yair Rodriguez. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Pitbull's about a plus 160 dog, and Yair's about a minus 185 favorite. So
there's actually no odds on this right now, according to the UFC.
Yeah, usually like when guys make their UFC debut like this, the odds aren't usually posted, and you could tell it. Media day was yesterday, on Wednesday and Tuesday. So his picture and all of his odds and stuff haven't been imported into the UFC because he's making his debut. Patricio Pitbull's 36-7. People say, oh, he's going to lose to Yair because Yair's been in the UFC for 11 years. I don't think so. I think this is a guy who's beaten the best talent out of probably one of the better promotions other than the UFC. I think that he's a very, very good all-around fighter. He's got a really, really high takedown, or significant strike defense, which is something to watch out for when Yair's landing about 5 significant strikes a minute. Someone who can defend over 60% of those isn't going to be taking those big shots. I feel like this fight is going to wind up going to the ground, and I think that Patricio is going to wind up spending a lot of time, in top control time against Yair Rodriguez. And I feel like he might try to sink in a submission, but I feel like he could also be like that grappler type and just try to control the round. For that reason, I think I want to take another dog on this card and go with Pitbull. You talk about, sure, he hasn't been, in the UFC, this is his debut, but Yair Rodriguez isn't what he used to be. I mean, after he lost to Volkanovski, it kind of was like, okay, maybe he's not as good as we thought he was. But Pitbull, I feel like, has all the tools to beat Yair Rodriguez.
Yeah, this almost like you're telling this story and telling like the situation around it. This almost sounds like one of those almost like a Diego Lopez story where it's like you got a guy who's just like coming into the UFC. No one really knows who he is, what he's about, what his story is, and this is a guy who's going to make a really big impact. Obviously, fighting wise is a different thing, but if you just look at story and how things feel, I almost agree with you on Pitbull. So, but let's now move up to the fight we were actually just talking about prior to skipping this one. Let's go back to the lightweight bout here of Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett. Who are you taking on this one? This one I think is this one's close. The odds have it close, and you might even see the odds change. I mean, minutes before fight time. But who do you think?
Absolutely. I've seen these odds change. I've seen Paddy jump out to a big favorite because the odds come out about a couple weeks before the fight usually. I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, you see the first odds. So Paddy was a slight favorite, or not a slight favorite, a sizable favorite, about minus 165. It's kind of been closer and closer to almost a pick'em fight. Now he's at minus 150, and I feel like Chandler is an underdog. You kind of gotta think about it. I mean, as much as I like Paddy, I think I want to go with this guy. I think I'm going to take Michael Chandler on this one.
Pulls out the card. What a reveal. What a reveal.
Absolutely. I think that even though Chandler, I believe, is only 2-4 in the UFC, he's fought some of the absolute best guys. He fought Oliveira twice, who somehow I think Oliveira's prime will never end. But that's another story for another day. But Paddy, I remember we talked about this last time with Bobby Green being the gatekeeper of this lightweight division. His last fight was against Paddy, and that's how Paddy became number 12 ranked, was by beating Bobby Green with a first-round submission. Even though Paddy is on that hype train and everybody loves him, even outside of the UFC, I think that Michael Chandler is going to come out there and shock the world and beat Paddy.
Right now, going back to that, Charles Oliveira is actually ranked second in the lightweight division. And then, like we just said, Chandler at number 7 and Paddy Pimblett at 12. Do you think there's anyone else let me ask you this real quick. Is there anyone else in the lightweight division? Obviously, Islam's the champ, so I wouldn't say him. But is there anyone else in between these two guys that you would like to see take on either one of them? Because I feel like I'm looking at the names here in between Michael Chandler and Paddy Pimblett. I'm not seeing too many. I mean, you got Rafael Fiziev, but I'm not seeing anyone that's eye-opening for me right now. So I almost feel like what I'm trying to say is I almost feel like the jump between these two guys, so the number 7 and the number 12, is actually really short. I don't feel like there's that much of a gap between these two guys. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Absolutely, and that's definitely a fair assumption. The only name that really sticks out to me in between them is Renato Moicano, who fought Islam on short notice. He fought Islam on short notice, lost in the first round via Darce choke, which I think everybody knew Islam was going to win. But yeah, I think that there's not really much of a skill gap between these guys per se in the rankings. But when you actually look at it, I think Chandler is a much better all-around fighter than Paddy is.
What's your final? Now we're getting to the fights I actually know, so I'm actually gonna make a pick here as well. But first, who are you finally taking in this fight? Is it Chandler?
I'm gonna take Michael Chandler in this fight. I think that Michael Chandler is a little bit better than Paddy. I'm not saying Paddy's bad, but he's definitely a little bit better. But yeah.
I'm gonna take Paddy in this one. I think both these guys. I think you make a lot of great points, but I think what it's gonna come down to is the reach, and Pimblett's got 2 inches on Chandler, and so I'm always going to favor a taller fighter, just because, especially when you're talking about striking and grappling. But I'll take Paddy on this one, and we'll see what happens on Saturday. Let's move on now to the main event, the title bout, the featherweight title bout. It is Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego, never had a good haircut in his life, Lopez, the number 1 versus the number 3 ranked fighter. Right now, Volkanovski is minus 122 and Diego Lopez is plus 102. A close fight. Odds-wise, might be the closest we've seen all night, and it might get even closer before the starting bell. Drew, break us down here. What should we expect here in this fight?
Absolutely, John. Sorry, my headset battery died. I had to swap it out real quick. So
oh man,
fix
what
that.
an unprofessional. What an amateur. What an absolute
It happens.
amateur.
It happens to the best of us.
It does. Oh wow. But go ahead.
So I'm sorry. I apologize, guys. But let's talk about this fight here. We got Alexander the Great Volkanovski versus Diego Lopez. I mean, both these guys are really good. Diego's a little bit taller, has a little bit longer reach, a little bit longer leg reach, but I feel like, as much as it pains me to say this is not the Volkanovski that we saw beat Max Holloway a couple years ago. This is an Alexander Volkanovski that's 1-3 in his last 3 fights. Lost a very close split decision to Islam when he went up to challenge for the lightweight belt. Took a short notice fight against Islam after Oliveira got cut in training camp, which, how does that happen? And then got knocked out in the first round. But then he faced Ilya Topuria, and gets absolutely demolished in round 2. And myself and a lot of other fans kind of shed a tear because we started to think, this is it for Volk. I feel like this is almost his last chance to really regain that belt. And if Volkanovski loses, I think he lays his gloves down in the center and says, thank you guys, but this is it. Diego's dangerous. He's incredibly fast, hits incredibly hard. He has all the tools needed to beat a guy like Volk. As much as it pains me to say it, I think Diego's going to win this one, and it's most likely going to be by knockout. I want Alex to win, I really do, but I just don't see him beating this new breed of fighter that we see in like Ilya and Diego and all these other young up-and-comers that are just so lightning fast and somehow manage to land every shot that they throw.
I'm going to agree with you on that one. I think, Lopez is just hot right now. I mean, we talk about, obviously I make fun of his hair, even though I know for a fact. If anyone asks, would I ever say Diego Lopez has a bad haircut to his face? No. No, I wouldn't. If you would, you're an idiot. Lopez has been really hot for, maybe 2 years now. Ever since coming onto the scene, he's just exploded. I think it happens with every single fighter that their peak lasts a certain period of time. Some guys, it lasts longer than others. Some guys, their peak is one fight. Some guys, their peak lasts 5 years. If you're John Jones, it's lasts your entire career, right? Right now, I just think Diego Lopez is at his peak. Whether or not, eventually it will run out, whether that's this fight, next fight, 3 fights from now, 4, 5, whatever it's going to be. But I just think Diego Lopez is at his peak right now, and it's really hard to beat guys who are on their peak. Do you agree?
Absolutely, and you talk about guys bursting on the scene out of nowhere. From the day of his UFC debut to the day of his title fight against Volk, his UFC debut to title shot is 704 days, which is absolutely crazy. He's lost before. He lost to Mavzar Evloev, who's still undefeated. But then you look at him at UFC 300 when he knocks out Sadiq Youssef, you go, okay, now we're starting to get into guys that are ranked. And then you see him just absolutely maul Brian Ortega at Noche UFC at 306 in September, and you go, okay, this guy's good. But is he Volkanovski good? In my opinion, I feel like Diego is young enough and dangerous enough to land one shot on Volkanovski, and that's it. We've seen Volkanovski's chin go from being able to take a flurry of strikes from Max Holloway to one clean placed hook from Ilya, and that's it. You're not knocked out in wake. Volkanovski got knocked out cold from that one shot from Ilya. So we're seeing his chin start to decline. He's starting to get a little bit older, and for that reason, I feel like Diego's just fresher and more ready to really, take on Volk. But at the same time, you got Volkanovski, who's making his 10th consecutive title fight. So he's used to going in these 5-round fights. Diego hasn't done that yet. So we really
So
got to
con-
sit
so
there and
condi-
sit down and see. Yeah,
So conditioning is another concern you're bringing up.
absolutely. But the one thing about Diego is that he trains in Mexico City from Brazil, trains in Mexico City, and their elevation is 7,200 feet, which is a lot higher than where we're going to be viewing this card at, which is
Miami.
at the Casella Center, yeah, where the Heat play. So the difference in pure elevation is going to be a major factor. I feel like Diego's going to be a lot fresher, just because he's used to training at really thin and high altitudes where the oxygen's not as prevalent as it is in a place like Miami.
Sure, I can understand that, but wouldn't you imagine that like a guy like who is a seasoned veteran like Volkanovski, like yeah, I understand the elevation thing. I mean that's why teams go and trade here in America because they go trade in Denver or Death Valley or something like that. They get like altitude worked in. But wouldn't you imagine that a trained veteran like that is almost geared towards? I'm sure he's faced a lot of guys in his career who have done that.
Absolutely, yeah, you're definitely right about that. But the only thing I can say about that is that this is going to be a little bit different than your typical newbie coming into a 5-round fight. Like we've seen Diego fight. I mean, he kind of gassed out versus Ige, but that was a short notice fight for both of them. So Volkanovski's tended to look really good in rounds 3, 4, and 5, which we call the championship rounds. But I honestly don't see the fight making it there. I could be wrong. You could always be wrong. But I feel like Diego is going to put him away before then.
All right. Well, both of us have Diego Lopez winning the featherweight title bouts here in UFC 313. That does it for our card analysis, but which means it's time for Drew's favorite segment of the entire show, the final round, the last pat, the final bell, whatever you want. I don't think we've actually ever settled on a name, but this is the segment where I ask Drew a unsolicited question. He has been given no prep time for this. Question for today is, who is Diego Lopez's barber? I'm kidding. That's not the question. That's not the question. But Drew, you go up and look at, I'm sure you can find numerous lists about this online of the amount of venues and arenas and stadiums who have not hosted a UFC event, and some of them are just completely inaccurate, so we'll skip past those. But Drew, let me ask you something. If you look at venues and places that have never hosted a UFC event, what would be your dream place to watch a fight?
That's hard because I've watched one live at T-Mobile Arena. I watched Noche UFC in 2023 there, and I mean I don't really see a bigger and more exciting venue than that. But if you're saying venues that have not hosted a UFC event,
yeah,
I know the United Center has, so I can't say that. Actually, here I'm gonna throw out a little bit of a curveball. I think I want to see one at Allegiant Stadium, in the new stadium in Las Vegas. I think that would be absolutely incredible to have a fight there. I mean that's right. It's not too far from T-Mobile, but that arena is just so big. I feel like you put a UFC event in there, that place is gonna be absolutely electric. Maybe Allegiant Stadium in Vegas, yeah.
Let me ask you something. Has there ever been an outdoor fight? Like a stadium that doesn't have a roof?
I think so. I don't remember when it was, but during COVID I believe we got that because there was when there was COVID, Dana said, "Okay, I don't care what you say about your COVID laws. I'm going to build an island in Abu Dhabi."
Yeah.
So they called it Fight Island.
Fight Island.
Yeah. I believe that was outdoor. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Looking at it here, it says it is a rare occurrence. But regardless, I have what I think is I have two really good options, I think. Both here in the Midwest, both not that far from where we live, Drew. But number one, Notre Dame Stadium. Notre Dame football stadium, I think, would be really good. It's huge. It actually holds the record for like the most concert people ever. I think Garth Brooks holds it. I know Zach Bryan's going for it in a couple of months here. But also the Shoe in Ohio State. I think Ohio State's football field, I think just the size of it, the noise, or better yet, I'll even add one more, Texas A&M Stadium.
Okay.
Can you just imagine how loud those events would be? That's what I'm thinking about in my head. Because indoor arena, you're only maybe hosting like 20 to 40,000 people, right? Dude, Texas A&M's football stadium holds like 110,000. And then if you put people on the field, you're looking at like 130,000 people watching a fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that'd be crazy. How much do you think? Here's another question for you. How much do you think the crowd matters in a UFC fight? Or do you think these guys are so trained it doesn't bother them?
Oh, the crowd for a UFC fight is surprisingly a really big thing. When I went to UFC Noche in 2022, or sorry, not 2023, It was on Mexican Independence Day, and Alexa Grasso, who's a Mexico native, was fighting for
One
the
of
belt.
one of the best fights or nights in UFC history. Far and away.
Absolutely,
Far and
absolutely. That was amazing. I still go back to rewatch, the Noche fight. But even in her rematch in 2024, you see everybody getting into the crowd. Like Grasso lands a takedown, that whole place goes nuts. Like I get goosebumps just thinking about like how into it the crowd was, and I know that these fighters feed into it. A lot of them said, "I love it. It's amazing," and I love to feed into the energy of the crowd. So that does play a huge factor.
Yeah, that's my like interpretation of it. Let's get a couple 100,000 people in the stadium, and let's watch a bunch
Absolutely.
of people just fight each other. But that's going to do it for Inside the Fence, brought to you by No Game Schedule. As always, huge thanks to NGS Chief UFC Analyst Drew Johnson. Drew, I know you took a break off work here to come talk with me for a little bit, and as always, we are appreciative of that. UFC 314 is this Saturday, April 12th. Make sure you don't miss it wherever you're watching, even though we know where you're really watching. And we'll see you next time, folks.